How can we evaluate worship? What criteria would you use? Because worship is just too intangible to measure. At least this is what I protested to my professor one day, and she just responded, "Just watch me." Being not at all pleased with that answer, but also recognizing that I had no other choice, I joined my assigned group to plan worship at the seminary for 1 week. It was 1 month after starting pastor's school, known as seminary. And on a Friday of the week, the group would gather in a professor's office to evaluate the weekly worship services that we had planned and presided at. They had a weird name for this. They called it ROTA, R-O-T-A. And I don't know why, but every time I heard the word, I couldn't help but imagine thumbscrews and hungry lions waiting in packed arenas. The sacred Roman Rota, of course, being an ecclesiastical tribunal, a final court of appeal. Again, a bizarre name for worship planning, don't you think? Maybe the name was supposed to warn us about something, I thought. It didn't help that the senior students would approach the week with fear and trembling. It was their job to organize the group, set meeting times, and make sure you showed up each day of the week. Lisa approached me with hesitant eyes and shuffling feet. I thought she was going to tell me that she backed over my cat, but instead she said with a wisp of apologetic resignation, "You're on for Rota next week." She made it sound like a noose was waiting for me. Rota, the tribunal, was gathering. Lisa said that I was in charge of planning Tuesday worship. Awesome, I thought to myself. Nobody comes to worship on Tuesdays. At least it didn't have the packed house that the Wednesday communion service did, so no pressure. Oh, by the way, you're also in charge of planning and assisting at Wednesday communion. Dope! Of course, this was not good, especially since the professor presiding at worship didn't think we needed to practice or even talk over the service. "You'll do fine," he kept assuring me, and I could feel my belly begin to grumble. For Tuesday worship, I thought I'd be creative and do a little postmodern mingling of traditions. I invited my friend Paul, an old roommate, who is now a worship leader and a songwriter at the Kitchener Vineyard Fellowship. It's kind of a hippy-dippy type of church with young people, long hair, Birkenstocks, rock bands. You get the idea. I liked his song. He was a great songwriter, so I said, "Come, bring your songs, we'll do them all together." And I wrote a Remembering Your Baptism service around the tunes he had written. It won't be what these Lutherans are used to, but these are really good songs, I told him. I'd seen Paul lead worship at his church and knew just how masterly he could bring people into God's presence by pointing beyond himself to the one we were worshiping. I'd seen him help people come to a joyous gratitude for what God has done for us in Jesus. Because Paul is talented, he's passionate, and he's very humble. But even Paul couldn't get these people to sing. And then came the Remembering Your Baptism part, and I prayed over the water, and I said, "I invite whoever would like to come up, receive a blessing of the cross on your forehead, and remember your baptism." Apparently no one wanted to remember their baptism that day or receive a blessing. Everyone just sat there as if super glue was stuck to their pants and flashlights were blasting at their retinas. And you need to remember that these weren't a group of stoic Norwegians or grumpy German farmers. They were seminary students and theology professors, professional church folks, people dedicating their lives to the proclamation of the gospel. I asked Paul to sing one more song, and then I gave the dismissal. "Just wait until Friday," my professor's eyes said as she frowned at me on the way out of the chapel. My heart plummeted into my shoes. I looked out the window. It had started to rain, and I felt my belly rumble again. And I was putting on my big white dress, my alb, we call it, for church on the Wednesday Eucharist. I noticed that there was no bread in the sacristy for communion, and usually there's a few stale pieces of flavorless cardboard left over, but surely someone was responsible for refilling what was used. Apparently that was my job. No one told me. So I ran across the street to the Lutheran student house, stole a loaf of bread, came back dodging the cars, and I was all wet from the rain, and I was ready for worship, sort of. We sang the opening hymn, and the professor who was presiding at communion looked at me as if I was supposed to do something. Like what? He pointed to the page, and it was the Kyrie, the part in the traditional Lutheran liturgy where we sing "Lord, have mercy" over and over again. And he looked at me quizzically, and then we shared an awkward pause. And then it dawned on me. He wanted me to sing. And I'm not sure if you know this, but when I was pastor at Lutheran Church of the Good Shepherd in Lethbridge, the sound techs were under strict instructions to turn off my microphone during the hymns, lest I blaspheme anyone's ears with my horrific caterwauling. If you ever heard a skunk with a tail stuck in a carburetor, you'll get a hint of what my obscene yowling sounds like. So I screeched my way through the Kyrie, the Lord have mercy part of the service, which seemed like an appropriate prayer at that moment, and set the tone for the rest of the day. And I felt my belly grumble again. I stopped at Tim Hortons on the way to the Friday evaluation. I needed a comforting shot of caffeine. With the tribunal assembled, I took my place as one standing accused. I hated the music your friends sang, my liturgy professor said, and the liturgy you wrote didn't bring me into worship. And you made so many mistakes during the Eucharist, I thought of telling you to sit down and grabbing someone else to help me, the other professor scolded me. I tried to defend myself, saying that this was my first experience with worship planning and worship leading. I tried to be creative, break out of the box a little bit. And then I received the worst piece of advice ever bestowed on a luckless seminarian. He said, "Do not risk anything new in worship unless you know 100% that it will work. Failure in worship is not an option." I'm still trying to figure out what failure in worship means, but apparently it's not an option. But I thought, wow, that was a different tale from the one I heard in the music faculty when I was working on my composition degree, because my first degree is in music composition. Because across campus in the music faculty, innovation and creativity were esteemed as moral virtues. The weirder, the better. If you're going to slam into a wall or want to hit it at full speed, my composition professors would proclaim with evangelical zeal. Just make sure you learn and grow from your mistakes. And after detailing everything I did wrong that week, the liturgy professor summed up everything by saying, "After you led worship, I didn't feel fed." I don't care if you weren't feeling fed. I'm not responsible for your feelings. That's what I wished I said. Instead, I just slumped in the chair wondering if I made a life-altering mistake by signing up with the seminary. It looked like there was more grace in the secular music department than with God's people at the seminary. "Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these?" Jesus asks a confused Simon Peter. "Of course, Lord, you know that I love you." "Feed my lambs," Jesus says. Well, it's easier said than done, especially when you don't know what the lambs are hungry for. But then again, Peter wasn't one to look before diving face first where saner mortals fear to stumble. However, Jesus did just feed him fresh fish at that picnic on the beach. So Peter was well nourished. Even when Peter and his buddies didn't, for whatever reason, recognize Jesus until he gave them some food, Jesus revealed himself to them because it was only through God-colored glasses that we can see Jesus for who he is. It was only when they broke bread with him in fellowship did their eyes open to see him, hiding in plain sight, fully present with and among them. And I wonder if we're all like that. We're all like Peter. We're all shepherd. We're all sheep together, feeding each other and being fed. I realized that I wasn't the only one responsible for making worship work. We all needed each other to see Jesus in our fellowship. We can't live this Christian life alone. But I'm guessing you already know that. This is why you're here today. You've arrived at this place because you know that being a Christian means being part of his body. It means sharing our lives with each other, walking the journey together, living as a family joined together by our common faith in the God who raised Jesus from the dead, and trusting that with the encouragement from sisters and brothers and challenge from fellow believers, you can grow more fully into who God wants you to be. And that's how you make your faith matter, by sharing yourselves with each other and receiving the gift of other people's lives from one another. You make your faith matter by being committed to your family of faith, growing closer even through conflict, and celebrating the successes that this congregation has seen. You make your faith matter by supporting the mission of this church, knowing that what we do in here makes an impact in what happens out there. About a week and a half after the tribunal, the professor whom I assisted at Holy Communion that Wednesday left a note in my mailbox. He said he was sorry for his behavior and he regretted that our relationship had begun on such a sour note. He asked for my forgiveness and that I come see him. He was sitting at his desk when I arrived in his office. I knocked, he beckoned me in, and he told me again how sorry he was, and again he asked for my forgiveness. We sat and talked for about an hour. He said he wanted to get to know me better, who I was, what I did before coming to seminary, why I wanted to be a pastor. And he told me about his life, the church he grew up in that was like a second family to him, about his ministry as a church planter, a mission developer in Toronto. He told me about his troubled marriage and about his leukemia. It's important that we really learn about each other, he said. I mean, really learn, he said, because we need each other to live more faithfully. We need to lean on each other as a family, because we're all in this together, aren't we? And that day, in that office, the rumble in my belly calmed. Amen.